Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to the channel. And today we're going to check out my solo PVE Magicka Sorcerer build for the Elder Scrolls Online. And this is something that I use a lot just for soloing dungeons, soloing world bosses, and basically farming gear and farming sets for my other characters. So it's pretty fun, it's really powerful, really strong, and I just thought I would put together a video for you guys. So we'll be going over some gear options, the skills and champion points, all coming up next, so stay tuned. Alright, let's check out the stats first of all, and just quickly, this character is not really like min-maxed for trials or DPS. The main focus of this character is solo play, so we're talking about staying alive primarily, and then just doing some passive damage, passive healing, and basically surviving through any fight possible. So good rounded stats here. We've got 42,000 Magicka, 21,000 health, 13,000 stamina. You can play with those numbers a little bit. You can see I put a mix of magic and health into my points here. And basically the minimum that you want to get would be pretty close to 20,000 health. That's going to make sure that you stay alive and you can absorb some really big hits in the game. And then over 40,000 Magicka is going to be your threshold. And then over about 12,000 stamina is what you want, because being solo, you are going to have to block, and you are going to have to roll dodge and sprint, and just get through some boss mechanics on this build. That's what the point of the build is. So pretty high stats overall, but a good mix of stats as well. The Magicka recovery is looking okay, 1700. And then spell damage is not bad, 2400. And then when we're buffed up, 2800. And then your physical and spell resist coming in at 12,000, spell crit 32%. You could raise that higher if you wanted to, but I don't really think it's needed. For race, I chose High Elf for this build. High Elf has a good mix of max Magicka, Magicka recovery, and damage. You could also go with Breton, Dark Elf, even Argonian if you wanted some fun use of potions for sustain there. And then Stage 4 Vampire is not required. It is nice though. The Undeath passive works well with damage shields, so that is nice when you start hitting, taking big hits and you're low health. You'll survive a little bit better, but again, not really necessary. We went with the Witch Mother's Potent Brew for the food here, so maximum Magicka recovery and health. And then the boon is the Mage, just to get that Magicka again over the 40k mark. Now, as far as sets go, there are some flexible options here, but definitely some things that I recommend. So first set we're using is going to be Shackle Breaker. This is really nice for the extra stamina on the 5-piece. So the 5-piece gives you about 2,000 Magicka and stamina. And like I mentioned, you're going to want a good amount of stamina for blocking, for roll dodging, for dealing with boss mechanics, basically. So the extra stamina boost here is nice. And then we do get the Magicka recovery. Stamina recovery is important too, as well as the spell damage. So I definitely recommend this as your main 5-piece set. Then our other 5-piece set that we're using, since this is a pet-focused build, a lot of our damage comes from pets, is we're using the Necropotent set. So basically just tons of max Magicka, about 6k total, and that goes up even more with our amps to Magicka. So we're using this for our second 5-piece. We're using this on the jewelry, and then 2 pieces on the body. And then we're using Shackle Breaker staff for 2 pieces there, and then 3 pieces on the body. For your third set, your Monster Helm now is basically open up to you in terms of what you're playing against, what you're fighting, and what you prefer. So for this particular version of the build, I'm using Shadow Rend because it gives that minor maim on boss. So basically it's going to reduce the boss's damage to you by 15%, which is really helpful with some bosses if you're farming some of the DLC dungeons or some of the heavier hitting world bosses. This is going to help you a lot. It's going to take off a lot of that damage before it gets to your damage shield. Other options you have here which are nice would be Alambris. So Alambris is going to be more of a damage focused set, but it is ground based, so you'll have to be fighting something that doesn't really move around a lot, but this would be a good option for that. And then Infernal Guardian is nice as well because it procs off your damage shields, and we're using shields a lot on this build to stay alive. So Shadowrend, Alambris, and Infernal Guardian, those would be like my top 3 probably for the build. In terms of weapons and traits, we're using the Lightning Staff on the front bar. This is really important because we're doing a lot of lightning heavy attacks. Those do a lot of area damage, which is great for farming dungeons, and we went with the Nirnhone trait here just to get the most damage possible, the most spell damage possible. And we were using a shock glyph, which I can show off a little bit later, but basically it helps you proc off balance, which helps you do more damage and get more magicka back on your heavy attacks. For the back bar, we went with Infused Restoration Staff. This is also Shackle Breaker. Remember, you need 2 Shackle Breaker weapons, so you get that 5-piece bonus on both bars. You don't want to lose it on bar swap. And we're using this with a weapon damage and spell damage enchant infused, so we basically get the most spell damage possible every 5 seconds with a 5-second cooldown, so you can have it up 100% of the time if you remember to swap back and do just a quick light attack. For the gear, just a mixture of infused for that those extra stats. So on my big pieces, I tried to go with the tri-stat infused because again, we need health, we need stamina, and we need magicka for the build. And then on your smaller pieces, you can do divines. I have a couple well-fitted as well. Well-fitted is good for roll dodges. So if you have a well-fitted shoulder or something, I would keep it. It's worth it to have a couple of those on the build as well. For the jewelry, our Necropotence jewelry, we just went with all spell damage. And we're able to do that again because we have good sustain with heavy attacks. Okay, the skills now, and some of these are flexible, but basically right now I've got Lightning Flood, which is AoE ground dot, and then we've got Wall of Storms, another AoE ground dot. So both of these combined will just mow down groups of mobs when you're trying to get through a dungeon, basically. Wall of Storms is going to proc our off balance. So by doing Wall of Storms and then channeling a heavy attack through that, you're going to proc off balance, which again, when an enemy is off balance and you heavy attack them, you're going to get double resources back. So that's really helpful when you're running low on resources. Next up is Hardened Ward. This is our damage shield, almost a 20k shield unbuffed, so you want to make sure you use that in between your dots. So lay down a couple dots, shield up in that last 6 seconds. So make sure again that is up as much as possible, especially if you're taking damage, you want that up at all times. Bound Aegis is just a nice buff this patch for max magicka 8%, and then even a little bit of spell resistance and physical resistance. And you don't have to have this double barred anymore, so basically I just have this on the front bar because that's where my shields are, where my shield is. Shields are based, shield strength comes from your magicka pool. So having this on the front bar is going to make my shield stronger, and it's going to help my attacks do more damage as well. On my next skill, we've got the Volatile Familiar Pet. This does AoE shock damage for about 8 seconds, and then on that last pulse after 8 seconds it'll do a stun too. So let's say if you're coming up to a group of mobs here, you'll want to get your pet going first, so that way by the time you engage right here, your pet will proc that stun, and it'll just help you take less damage overall. The ultimate we went with on the front bar is the Greater Storm Atronach, and again this is based on pets, so it's a pet focused build, so it just makes sense to have this along with our Volatile Familiar. This is really good. It lasts for almost 30 seconds, so in some cases you can almost get enough ultimate back to keep this up like 80% of the time in a fight if there's enough mobs. Really good for damage and sustain. On the back bar, this is our Restoration Staff. Daedric Prey, this is a really important part of the build. You can see it's a 6-second burst damage ability, but the reason why we're using this is not for the damage really, it's for the buff to our pets. So when the curse is active, your pets deal 55% extra damage, except for the Storm Atronach ultimate, which does 40%. So basically if you apply this Daedric Prey skill to the boss, your pets are going to do tons of damage. They're just going to rip through the boss. And that's the whole point of this build, is your pets are going to do the work for you, and while you just do the boss mechanics, keep your shields up, and stay alive, basically. So really important to keep this up 100% of the time on a boss. Got Summon Volatile Familiar again, because we need the pet to be double barred, otherwise it will go away. Healing Ward is just a healing skill. A lot of the times you will not need this at all. It's basically just your emergency heal. So if you're taking a lot of damage, while you're on the front bar, you'll want to pop your ward and then drop your healing ward. And basically this can heal you from about 15 to 20% health back to full. But you want to make sure you combine this with your front bar damage shield as well. Our last two skills are buffs. Power Surge is really important, super important actually on this build, not just because it does major sorcery, which is our spell damage buff, but because of that healing component. This is passive healing, which is one of the strongest things you can get on any build. So it passively heals you for almost 3,000 health every 1 second. When you do critical strikes, you're going to be critting every second on this build. No problem. You have all of these AoE dots on the ground. And then also using our last skill, this is also AoE damage over time. It is Boundless Storm, so it's going to shock everybody around you every 1 second. So you don't really need the Major Resolve, Major Ward because we have damage shields, but really the purpose of this buff is to help proc our Power Surge healing. And then also the movement speed is nice, so when you're just moving around the dungeon or whatever, trying to get to the next spot, that extra speed is always good. Backbar ultimate's kind of up to you. I have Shooting Star here. This would be good for like trash mob pulls because you get ultimate back for each enemy hit, so I probably would reserve that for trash mobs. And then for boss fights, definitely you want to use your Atronach instead. Couple flex skills here. You can run, let's see, Dark Conversion. If you're having trouble sustaining, this basically converts stamina into Magicka, so this is not a bad idea. It also comes with a heal, a really nice heal, so you could potentially do Dark Conversion instead of Healing Ward to help you with your sustain. The other skill that I like running on certain boss fights, and I had it in the clip in the intro, is going to be Streak. So Streak is really good for just avoiding bosses and for kiting. If it's not really a stationary fight, but more of a mobile fight, then Streak was really good for that. So then the champion points really quickly. Let's see. In the green tree, we've got 18 into Warlord, 23 Sprinter, 49 into Tenacity, because we are doing a lot of heavy attacks on the build. 56 Arcanist, that's going to boost your Magicka recovery. We do want Summon Mooncalf for stamina recovery, so about 27 there. Shadow Ward, you are blocking on this build quite a bit because those boss heavy attacks are nasty. You want to make sure you block those out, so Summon to here is good. And then Tumbling, the alternative would be you can also roll dodge a boss heavy attack, so both of these you really want points into both. In the blue tree, 28 spell erosion, 56 elemental expert, 34 into Elfborn, 23 into Blessed. These are both going to help our healing and survivability a lot. 27 into Staff Expert, again buffing those heavy attacks. Master at Arms, just one here because we really have very little direct damage. It's going to be mostly dots, which you can see we have 81 into Thaumaturge here. Big boost for dots there. 40 into Ironclad, 56 into Hardy, 43 Elemental. I just had one left over for Light Armor, and 20 Thick Skinned. And then 18 Expert Defender and 72 in Bastion, really important for our damage shields. That's what's going to help keep us alive as well. So just a couple other things we could talk about as far as how you play the build is obviously you want to make sure your Power Surge and your Lightning Form is going. And then, like I mentioned, you can start your pet before you come up to a group. And then once you get here, you really want to just shield and drop your AoE dots and then heavy attack from there. You can drop a couple heavy attacks, pet again. And then we have a bigger target here, so we're going to want to use that Daedric Prey skill to make our pet just do way more damage against him. So drop my dots again, heavy attack, and then make sure your buffs are up. And that's basically it. See, we can do kind of a larger fight here. So in this case I have some bigger mobs here. This is where I would probably use an ultimate. So again, buff up. Get my pet going. I'm going to go ahead and drop my Atronach here. Make sure my shield is up, and then AoE damage and heavy attack. Let me get out of here. So there's a lot of red, so I'm going to use a roll dodge. Ground dots again, pet, buffs. That's about it. Okay, I'm going to use my speed buff to get to the next fight. Got a beefier target here. Ground dots. You can see the pet timer is about 8 seconds, so you can combine that with your Daedric Curse. Kind of keep those up at the same time. Block here. You can see my Shadow Rend is proccing on the bigger target, so that's really good. Something that I don't think I mentioned is for your pets to go where you want, they'll go to whatever target you are hitting with a heavy attack. So in most cases you want to focus on the big mob in the pack with a heavy attack, and that will focus your pets there. Let's go ahead and show that again. So I got my pet, I'm going to shield up and then drop my ultimate. And then for that big boy right there, heavy attack and Daedric Prey just to get every pet focused on him. And make sure my ground dots are down. Heavy attack. Most of the little mobs are just going to die to your AoEs anyways. So keeping that heavy attack on the boss is important. Alright everybody, that'll just about do it for this solo Magicka Sorcerer build. I'm just going to throw in some clips here at the end of Scalecaller Peak. I was soloing this recently on the build. I was trying to farm a couple sets for PvP builds, and it was pretty interesting, pretty intense, some of these boss fights. And I honestly don't think you could do it on any other setup than this, because Magicka Sorcerer has the mobility and the shields and the healing and the pet damage. It just works really good. So give it a try. Let me know what you think. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. It would really help me out. And until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.